Rain poured over the church gate that night. A war veteran stepped out of his truck when he saw a little girl standing in the storm, soaked, trembling, her metal leg glinting under the streetlight. "They took my mom," she whispered, clutching a tiny puppy as if her life depended on it, then pointed toward the darkness at the end of the road. That moment changed everything. Because sometimes the smallest cry for help in the rain can awaken a hero who thought his battles were long over. Before we begin, do you believe that even in our darkest moments, kindness can still light the way? Stay with us, subscribe, and let this story remind you that heroes walk among us, quiet, humble, and real. The night over Ashwood, Oregon, fell heavy and restless. Clouds pressed low against the mountains, and rain lashed through the narrow streets like a relentless tide. The town's small church, St. Helena, stood at the edge of the forest, its stained glass windows dark, its bell silent. Only the faint glow of the street lamp near the gate pierced the curtain of rain. Inside his old gray pickup truck, Jack Carter, 42, a war veteran marked by years of duty and loss, sat quietly with one hand on the steering wheel, watching the storm swallow the mountain road. Jack had driven up here countless times before, sometimes to think, sometimes just to listen to the rain. He carried in him the weight of a man who had seen too much, the distant deserts of war, the sound of gunfire replaced now by the hum of rain on metal. 3 years had passed since his wife's sudden death in what the doctors called a medical incident. No explanations, only silence and paperwork. Since then, he had learned to live with ghosts, ones that didn't haunt through screams but through quiet. He leaned back, letting the sound of thunder drown the noise inside his head. Then, through the windshield's haze, something moved. A small figure emerged from the sheets of rain, stumbling along the narrow path that led to the church gate. Jack blinked, leaning forward, the wipers squealing against the glass. The figure grew clearer with each flash of lightning, tiny, fragile, and limping. One leg moved stiffly, the other glinting silver in the faint light. The child's clothes clung to her body, soaked through, and in her arms was a bundle of fur, shivering violently. Jack's instincts took over. He pushed the door open and stepped into the downpour. "Hey!" he called out, but his voice was lost in the roar of rain. The little girl looked up for an instant, eyes wide with fear and exhaustion. She couldn't have been more than 5 years old. Her lips moved, trembling, and her small frame wavered as if the storm itself were too heavy for her to stand against. When he reached her, she barely managed to whisper, "They took my mom." Then her knees buckled. He caught her before she hit the ground. The child's skin was ice cold. Her hands clutched the small puppy so tightly he could feel the tiny heartbeat against her palm. "Easy, sweetheart," Jack murmured, cradling her gently. The puppy, a 1-month-old German shepherd by the looks of it, whimpered softly, pressing into the girl's chest as if sharing her fear. The creature's fur was drenched, tiny paws twitching, but it didn't make a sound beyond that faint whine. Jack glanced toward the church door, locked, dark, and without another word, carried both child and animal back to his truck. Inside, the cab fogged with warmth as Jack turned on the heater. The girl trembled under his jacket, clutching the puppy close. For a long moment, she said nothing, only the quiet hitch of her breath, filling the space between the rain and the hum of the engine. Jack reached for a blanket from the seat behind and wrapped it around her small shoulders. "You're safe now," he said softly, though he wasn't sure she could hear him. Slowly, her eyes lifted to his, wet lashes heavy with tears. "They came to our house," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "2 people, wearing white coats. They said they had to take my mommy to do tests, but they didn't come back." Jack's jaw tightened. His mind flashed through too many nights like this, too many faces, too many children whose lives had been torn open by someone's cruelty. "Do you remember what they looked like?" he asked. The girl shook her head weakly. "No, just white coats, and they talked like doctors." She lowered her gaze to the puppy in her arms, rubbing its damp fur with her thumb. "Mommy said not to be scared if something happened. She told me to find help." He studied her closely now. The child, Emily, had short, fair hair plastered to her forehead, her face pale but strikingly brave for someone so small. A faint scar marked the edge of her prosthetic leg, the metal joint gleaming under the dashboard light. Around her neck hung a silver locket, delicate and heart-shaped, catching the reflection of the rain-soaked glass. Jack noticed the engraving as she shifted, the faint words, "Love you, Mom." The sight of it hollowed him for a moment. It was the same kind of locket his wife once wore before the accident. He turned slightly toward her, voice steady but low. "What's your name?" he asked. "Emily," she murmured. "Emily Carter." Jack froze for a second at the sound of the last name, a strange, silent echo of his own, but he said nothing, only nodded slowly. "All right, Emily. We'll find her, I promise." She looked at him as though trying to decide whether to believe that promise, then nodded faintly, exhausted. The puppy shifted in her lap, letting out a small sneeze, and Emily's thin fingers stroked its tiny head. "His name's Rex," she said softly. "He's little, but brave." Jack smiled faintly, glancing at the rearview mirror where rain streamed down the glass. "That makes two of you," he said quietly. Outside, the storm raged on, but inside the cab, something steadier began to form. A fragile bond built not on words, but on the shared silence of two people who had lost too much. The clock on the dashboard ticked past midnight. The church bell began to toll, slow, distant, almost mournful. Jack looked at the child, her eyelids heavy, the puppy tucked beneath her chin. For a moment he saw a flicker of his past reflected in her, the same helplessness, the same fear that once lived in his eyes after the hospital called about his wife. He took a deep breath, exhaled slowly, and rested one hand gently over Emily's shoulder. "It's all right now," he murmured. "You're safe." Outside, the bell's final note faded into the storm. Jack glanced at the locket again, the engraved words shimmering faintly beneath the light. In the glow of the church's cross, half hidden by rain, he made a quiet vow, a promise not just to the girl beside him, but to himself. "We'll find your mother," he whispered, "whatever it takes." Emily stirred faintly, clutching the puppy closer, and as thunder rolled across the mountain, the old soldier started the engine once more, guiding the truck into the night. The rain had eased by dawn, leaving behind a mist that curled through the valley like smoke. Jack Carter's truck rumbled down the narrow road toward the edge of Maple Hollow, where small houses stood scattered against the backdrop of pine and frost. Emily sat quietly in the passenger seat, wrapped in a blanket too big for her, the tiny puppy curled up asleep in her lap. The storm had drained the color from the world, and in that pale gray light, every sound seemed louder. The hum of the engine, the creak of the wipers, the soft breath of a child trying to be brave. Jack drove slowly, his eyes scanning the road ahead, the kind of watchfulness that never truly left a soldier. When they reached the Carter residence, the sky was the color of pewter. The small cottage stood on the edge of the woods, its front gate half open, the porch light still flickering. Jack pulled the truck to a stop and cut the engine. Emily's eyes lifted toward the house, and something in her face shifted, a mix of hope and fear. "That's our home," she said softly. The puppy whimpered as if sensing her unease. Jack stepped out first, scanning the area, the instinct of an old Marine, sharp as ever. The yard was muddy, tire tracks pressed deep into the gravel, still fresh enough to hold their shape. The wind carried the faint smell of coffee and rain. He approached the front door, noticing it was ajar. "Emily, stay here," he said gently, and she nodded, clutching the puppy tighter. The hinges creaked as Jack pushed the door open. The first thing he noticed was the silence, thick and unnatural. Inside, the air was cool, but faintly smelled of perfume and disinfectant. He stepped inside, boots thudding softly against the hardwood floor. The living room was in disarray. A chair tipped over, magazines scattered, and a coat lay crumpled near the stairs. On the dining table sat a single cup of coffee, still faintly warm to the touch. He held it for a moment, the heat fading against his palm. "She was here," he muttered under his breath, "not long ago." The kitchen looked like someone had left in a hurry. Cupboard doors half open, drawers slightly pulled out, as though someone had been searching for something, or had been interrupted while packing. On the counter, a small notebook lay open with a child's doodles and a half-finished grocery list. Jack's eyes moved to the medicine cabinet beside the fridge, where rows of labeled bottles were neatly arranged. One slot stood empty. A small sticker read, "Meropenem," a hospital-grade antibiotic that had no business being in a private home. Jack frowned. He'd heard the name before, back in service hospitals overseas. Restricted drug, used only under tight control. He set the bottle aside, his gut tightening. Emily's voice came softly from the doorway. "That's Mom's medicine box," she said, wiping her nose with her sleeve. "She kept it locked, but it's open now." Jack crouched beside her, his tone calm. "Did she ever say why she had hospital medicine here?" The little girl shook her head. "She said someone at work needed it once, but she didn't want to talk about it." As she spoke, the puppy, Rex, squirmed in her arms and sniffed the air, whining faintly toward the back door. Jack followed his gaze and spotted a folded scrap of paper on the floor near the dining chair. He picked it up carefully. It was damp, the ink smudged, but one line remained clear. "It's not your fault." Jack stood still, the note trembling slightly between his fingers. The handwriting was hurried, desperate. He folded it and slipped it into his jacket pocket. His mind was already turning through possibilities, none of them good. Whoever had taken Sarah Carter had done so quietly, efficiently, and with the precision of people who knew what they were doing. And they had left behind no threat, only guilt. He turned toward the doorway as a sound echoed from outside, footsteps crunching on gravel. Instinctively, his hand went to the pistol under his coat, though he didn't draw it. An old man appeared through the morning fog, thin, stooped, wearing a heavy wool cardigan and a cap pulled low. His face was lined with years of mountain weather, his gray eyes sharp but kind. "You're Jack Carter, right?" he asked, his voice raspy. "Name's Lyle. Live 2 houses down." Jack nodded. "Did you see anything last night?" The man hesitated, glancing toward Emily before speaking. "Hard not to. Around 5 this morning, I saw a black SUV stop right there." He pointed toward the road by the mailbox. "Didn't turn on its lights. 2 folks got out. White coats, looked like hospital people, but something didn't sit right. They went inside, stayed a few minutes, then came out with someone between them. Could have been the girl's mother. They left quick." Jack's brow furrowed. "You didn't catch the plate?" Mr. Lyle shook his head. "Too much rain. But the way they moved, not like paramedics, too clean, too quiet." He paused, looking back toward the house, his voice lowering. "You be careful, son. Folks around here mind their own business. Sometimes that's the only way to stay out of trouble." Jack offered a tight nod of thanks, his jaw set. The air between them carried an unspoken understanding. This wasn't random. Someone had planned it. When the old man left, Jack returned inside, closing the door behind him. Emily sat at the table now, her small hands cupped around the coffee mug as if to hold on to what was left of warmth. The puppy slept in her lap, its tiny chest rising and falling. "Do you think she's okay?" she asked. Jack crouched down, meeting her eyes. "We'll find her," he said firmly, "but I need you to trust me, all right?" She nodded, though her gaze was distant, lost in fear and confusion. He stood and pulled out his phone. There was one person he trusted enough to call: Sheriff Michael Donnelly. The phone rang twice before a deep, familiar voice answered. "Carter," Donnelly said, his tone cautious. "Been a long time." Jack didn't waste words. "Mike, I've got a missing person, Sarah Carter, taken from her home by people posing as medical staff. I found signs she was taken only hours ago. Maripanem gone, note left behind. You need to send someone." There was silence on the other end, broken only by static. Then Donnelly exhaled slowly. "Jack, listen to me carefully. Leave it alone." Jack's grip tightened. "What the hell does that mean?" "Exactly what I said," Donnelly replied, his voice lower now. "This isn't a simple abduction. There are people involved you don't want to cross. Walk away, Carter, for your sake and hers." Jack's eyes darkened. "That woman's daughter is 5 years old," he said coldly. "You want me to tell her the sheriff won't help?" There was no answer, only the click of the line disconnecting. Jack stared at the phone for a long moment, the faint hum of static still ringing in his ear. He slipped the phone back into his pocket, jaw clenched, eyes fixed on the rain outside. He had seen this pattern before, orders to stay out, silence where justice should have spoken. Emily looked up at him, her small voice trembling. "Is he coming?" Jack forced a small smile. "Not yet," he said, "but that's all right. We'll start without him." The words hung heavy in the air, the kind that didn't need explanation. The bell from St. Helena began to toll again in the distance, faint and hollow, as if the town itself were holding its breath. Morning came gray and silent over Maple Hollow, a mist clinging low across the valley like breath on glass. Jack Carter's truck rolled through the thin fog, headlights cutting a pale path toward the largest building in town, Maple Hollow Medical Center, a concrete block washed in dim blue light and surrounded by the hum of cold air units. Emily sat in the back seat, small hands gripping the sleeping puppy on her lap. Her face was pale but steady, the resilience of a child who had already endured too much. Jack glanced at her in the mirror, his voice quiet. "This is where your mom worked, right?" She nodded slowly, not taking her eyes off the faint outline of the hospital ahead. When they stepped out, the air was sharp and damp, carrying that sterile chill unique to medical places. The parking lot was nearly empty, puddles reflecting the faint glow of the entrance sign. As they walked toward the sliding doors, the sound of their footsteps vanished under the blanket of fog. Emily limped slightly on her metal leg. The puppy nestled under Jack's jacket for warmth. Inside, the fluorescent lights buzzed softly, a dull echo beneath the distant beep of machines. The reception desk was unattended, a faint smell of disinfectant filling the air. It felt less like a place of healing and more like a building that had learned to hide its secrets. Jack guided Emily to a row of chairs and walked toward the nearest nurse's station. A woman in her late 50s stood behind the counter, sorting papers. She had dark skin, short gray curls, and tired but kind eyes that flicked up at the sound of footsteps. Her name tag read, Clara Johnson. When she saw Emily sitting near the wall, her hand froze mid-motion. "Oh, my lord. Emily," she said, her voice breaking with disbelief. She came around the counter quickly, kneeling beside the little girl. "Honey, what happened? Where's your mama?" Emily's eyes welled up instantly. "They took her," she whispered. "Two people said they were doctors, but they weren't." Clara's face went pale, her voice trembling as she turned toward Jack. "Who are you?" He reached into his jacket and showed his veteran ID. "Jack Carter. I found her last night near St. Helena's Church. She was out there alone in the storm." Clara pressed a trembling hand to her mouth. "Dear God, Sarah told me something like this might happen." Jack's eyes narrowed. "What do you mean?" Clara stood slowly, glancing down the hall as if the walls themselves might be listening. Her voice dropped to a whisper. "Sarah wasn't just any nurse. She found something she wasn't supposed to see." She motioned for them to follow her. They walked past the main corridor, where flickering lights cast shifting shadows across the linoleum floor, and into a small break room tucked behind a supply closet. Clara shut the door and drew the blinds before speaking again. It started with a doctor, Vance Kepler. Charming, confident, the kind of man everyone trusted. He handled post-surgery patients, pain management mostly. But Sarah noticed discrepancies, dosages not matching records, missing vials of oxycodone, prescriptions signed under names that didn't exist. Jack folded his arms, listening. "And she reported it?" Clara nodded. "Straight to the board. She thought she was doing the right thing. But after that, things got bad. Someone broke into her locker, trashed her car, and she started receiving notes at home. The last one she showed me said, 'If you don't want to lose your daughter, keep quiet.'" Clara's voice cracked, the fear still raw even in recollection. "I told her to go to the police, but she said she didn't trust them anymore. She thought someone here was helping cover it up." Emily's small voice broke the silence. "Mama said people were hurting others and making medicine that wasn't real." Clara's eyes filled with tears. That's what she was afraid of. Dr. Kepler wasn't just stealing medication, he was passing it to a private research group, MedCore Research, some kind of pharmaceutical outfit pretending to fund pain studies. Sarah found proof. Experimental drugs that weren't approved, given to patients without consent. When she confronted him, he smiled and told her she'd lose everything if she spoke another word. Jack exhaled slowly, the anger behind his calm growing sharp. "So she kept working here anyway?" Clara nodded. "She wanted to protect Emily. She said she couldn't just walk away, not until she had evidence. A few nights ago she told me she was close. But if anything happened to her, Clara stopped, swallowing hard. She said to find her at a place called Old Pine Facility. It used to be a care home, shut down after a fire 10 years ago. Everyone says it's haunted, but I think she meant something else. Maybe she hid something there. The name hung in the air like smoke. Jack looked toward the window where fog pressed against the glass. Old Pine, he murmured. That's out past the ridge, near the forest line. Clara nodded quickly. Be careful if you go. People still see lights there at night, unmarked vans sometimes, and strange deliveries, boxes locked, always at dawn. She hesitated, then added, Sarah believed someone from inside this hospital was part of it, maybe more than one. Jack's hand tightened around the back of the chair. The pattern was clear now. A whistleblower silenced, a child left alone, and a trail leading somewhere the law refused to touch. He turned toward Emily, who sat quietly, petting the puppy's soft head. The little dog looked up at him with dark, trusting eyes, as if sensing his thoughts. We're going to find her, Emily, Jack said, steady and certain. And we're going to make sure whoever did this never touches her again. Clara stepped closer, lowering her voice. Jack, if what Sarah said was true, this goes deeper than you think. Be careful. Please. He met her gaze with the calm of a man who had already accepted the risk. I've seen deep before, he said quietly, and I've already made my choice. For a moment the room was silent except for the hum of the hospital lights. Then Clara reached into her pocket and handed him a folded paper. This was on Sarah's desk yesterday morning. I didn't know what it meant. Jack unfolded it and read the single word written in red ink. Pine. He looked up, eyes cold but clear. Then that's where we start. Clara's hand trembled as she opened the door for them. Jack, she whispered, if you find her, tell her she was right. She wasn't crazy. He nodded once and led Emily toward the exit. Outside, the fog thickened, swallowing the road in silence. Emily held Rex close, her small voice barely audible. Is that where she is? Jack started the truck, eyes fixed on the mist ahead. That's where we'll find out. The engine rumbled to life, and as they drove toward the ridge, the first rays of sunlight broke through the haze, falling over Maple Hollow like a pale promise that hope, however fragile, was still alive. Rain followed them north like a shadow. The road that led out of Maple Hollow wound deep into the mountains, where mist clung to the trees and the light faded fast beneath heavy clouds. Jack Carter gripped the wheel, his eyes fixed on the narrow dirt path ahead. The truck's headlights cut through curtains of rain, revealing a forest that looked more like a memory than a place, dark, ancient, and breathing. Beside him, Emily sat quietly, her hands clutching the sleeping puppy against her chest. Every now and then, she glanced out the window, watching the raindrops streak across the glass like tears. The air grew colder as they entered the woods. Branches arched over the road, forming a tunnel of dripping leaves and shadows. The tires crunched over wet gravel and mud, the sound steady and low like a heartbeat. Old Pine Facility, Jack murmured, checking the faded sign half buried in weeds. The paint was chipped, the letters nearly gone. Looks like we found it. The building emerged from the fog, a sprawling two-story structure swallowed by vines and moss. Its windows were boarded, the roof half collapsed, and its once white walls stained with time. A rusted gate leaned open, creaking faintly in the wind. Emily's small voice trembled. Mom worked here once, before it closed. Jack nodded. That's what Clara said. He parked the truck just beyond the gate and stepped out into the rain. The forest around them seemed to hold its breath. Water dripped from the eaves, and somewhere in the distance, a crow cried once and fell silent. Jack turned his collar up and lifted Emily into his arms, setting her down gently near the steps. Stay close to me, all right? He said. She nodded, clutching the puppy. Its tiny nose twitched, ears pricked, as if sensing something unseen. Inside, the air was damp and cold, thick with the smell of rot and old medicine. The beam of Jack's flashlight cut across peeling paint, broken furniture, and scattered files yellowed with age. The hall stretched long and dark, lined with patient rooms whose doors hung crooked on their hinges. Every sound echoed, each footstep, each drop of water falling from the ceiling. Emily pressed close to him, eyes wide. It's so quiet, she whispered. Jack gave a faint, reassuring smile. Quiet doesn't mean empty. His flashlight swept over the floor where dust lay thick, except for one section near the far wall where faint footprints broke the pattern. Fresh ones. He knelt, examining the prints. They led toward a narrow corridor branching off the main hall. Something small caught his eye, a scrap of fabric caught on a broken nail near the doorframe. He lifted it carefully into the light. The cloth was blue-gray, part of a uniform sleeve, the edge embroidered with a single name in faded thread, S. Carter. Jack's pulse quickened. "She's been here," he said softly. Emily clutched Rex tighter, her lower lip trembling. The puppy gave a low whine, sensing her fear. Jack pocketed the torn fabric and stood. "Come on, we're not leaving until we find her." They followed the corridor deeper inside. The further they went, the colder it grew, the air heavy with moisture. The flashlight flickered once, then steadied. Jack's boots left wet prints on the floor. They passed what had once been an operating room, now stripped bare except for rusted tables and tangled wires. Emily's metal leg clinked faintly with each step. "I don't like it here," she said, voice small. "Neither do I," Jack replied, "but your mom's somewhere close." Then Rex suddenly squirmed out of her arms and darted forward, tail low, nose to the ground. He barked once, sharp and urgent. Jack hurried after him, following the beam of light as it bounced off the walls. The puppy stopped in front of a massive wooden cabinet that stood against the far end of the corridor. It was old, its surface warped and splintered, but something about it seemed wrong. Too clean around the edges, as if recently moved. Jack ran a hand along the side, then crouched. Scuff marks lined the floor beneath it. "Help me move this," he said, but Emily just stared. "It's okay. I've got it." He braced his shoulder against the cabinet and pushed. With a groan of wood and rusted metal, it slid aside, revealing a narrow stairwell descending into darkness. The smell of damp concrete and rust wafted up. Jack turned on the flashlight again and leaned forward. Somewhere below, metal clinked faintly, like chains shifting. Then, beneath it, a sound softer still, the uneven rhythm of someone breathing. "Stay here," he whispered, but Emily grabbed his sleeve. "No," she said fiercely. "She's my mom." He hesitated, then nodded once. "All right, but stay right behind me." He took her hand, the other gripping the flashlight, and they began the slow descent. Each step groaned under their weight. The air grew colder, heavier, as if the building itself were holding in a secret. At the bottom of the stairs stretched a long corridor lined with doors. The light from the flashlight shimmered against the damp walls, revealing streaks of rust, or maybe old blood. Jack moved quietly, listening. The breathing grew louder, mixed with a faint rhythmic tapping, like metal against stone. Emily's eyes darted nervously from one shadow to another. Then, at the far end of the hall, something glimmered, a small reflection of light. Jack moved closer, and there she was, Sarah Carter. She sat slumped against the wall, wrists bound with medical tape, her nurse's uniform torn and stained. Her face was pale, eyes half open, lips cracked from dehydration. When the flashlight fell across her, she flinched weakly, then focused, her gaze locking on Emily. "Mom!" the little girl cried, her voice breaking as she ran forward. She dropped to her knees beside her mother, arms wrapping tight around her. Rex barked and pressed, close, licking Sarah's hand. Tears streamed down Emily's face, mixing with the dirt and rain. Jack knelt beside them, pulling a small knife from his boot to cut the bindings. Sarah's breathing hitched as the tape gave way. "It's all right," Jack said gently. "You're safe now." She tried to speak, her voice a rasp. "They tried to stop me," she whispered. "The medicine, it wasn't real. They tested it on patients, on us." Jack's jaw tightened. "Who did this?" She swallowed weakly, her eyes flicking toward the shadows. "Medcorps. Kepler. They wanted silence." Her gaze shifted to Emily, her hand trembling as she touched her daughter's cheek. "You have to take her. Don't let them find her." Her voice faded to a whisper. "Promise me." Jack nodded, his chest heavy. "I promise." Sarah tried to smile, but exhaustion claimed her. Her head fell forward, eyes fluttering closed. Emily screamed softly, shaking her mother's arm. "Mom, wake up!" Jack placed a hand on her shoulder. "She's alive," he said. "She just needs rest." He checked her pulse, faint but steady. The puppy whined and curled against Sarah's lap as if guarding her. Jack exhaled slowly, the air cold in his lungs. Above them, thunder rolled again through the forest, distant yet foreboding. He looked down the corridor, then back at the stairs. "We're not safe here," he murmured, "but at least we're together now." Rain still poured from the heavens when Jack Carter lifted Sarah onto his back. The storm had swallowed the forest whole, its voice now a mixture of wind, thunder, and the distant echo of sirens. Emily followed close behind, clutching the now soaked puppy to her chest, as if it were her last link to safety. The beam of Jack's flashlight cut through the darkness one last time, guiding them through the broken halls of the old pine facility. He didn't look back. The place had already said enough. With every step he could hear Sarah's faint breathing against his shoulder, proof that, for now, life still held. The rain met them with full force as they emerged into the open. Mud clung to Jack's boots, water streaming down his face. But he didn't slow down. He crossed the overgrown yard toward the truck parked beyond the gate, his breath sharp and steady, his mind focused. Behind them, the forest groaned under the weight of wind. He laid Sarah gently across the back seat, wrapping her in his jacket, then turned to Emily. "Stay with her," he said softly. "I'll make the call." He stepped a few paces away and pulled out his phone, shielding it beneath his hand as he dialed a number he hadn't used in years, the county emergency line. His voice was low, calm, and without a name. "There's a woman in need of medical attention at the old pine facility," he said. "You'll find evidence of a crime there. Hurry." Then he hung up before they could ask questions. Minutes later, the first faint wail of sirens rose through the storm. Red and blue lights shimmered across the trees, bending through the rain like broken stars. Jack stood by the truck, one hand on the door, watching the lights approach from the winding road below. Emily peered out from the back seat, her small voice trembling. "Are they going to help her?" Jack turned and met her eyes. "Yes, sweetheart. They will now." The puppy licked at Sarah's hand as the flashing lights grew brighter, closer, until the night itself seemed to pulse with them. When the first police cars reached the gate, Jack exhaled, long and slow, the sound nearly lost to the storm. Two officers stepped out, flashlights cutting through the rain. "We got an anonymous report," one shouted. "Who's here?" But by the time they reached the building, the truck was gone, its taillights fading into the mountain road. Jack didn't stay to be thanked. He drove silently through the night, the storm fading behind him, the first hint of dawn breaking on the horizon. For the first time in years, he felt a quiet peace settle over him, the kind that comes not from victory, but from doing what was right. The following weeks unfolded slowly as the investigation began to peel away the lies surrounding Maple Hollow Medical. News spread across the state. Dr. Vance Kepler, the respected physician, was arrested alongside executives from MedCore Research. Reports revealed that experimental drugs had been tested illegally on patients, and in some cases, on the hospital's own staff. Authorities found evidence hidden in the old pine basement, vials, documents, and unregistered samples that matched Sarah Carter's handwriting. Her courage had broken open something dark enough that no one could ignore it anymore. Sarah remained under observation at the county hospital for several weeks. Her body was weak, but her will was unbroken. The first time she opened her eyes and saw Emily beside her bed, tears filled them both. "You came for me," Sarah whispered. Emily nodded, clutching her mother's hand, the puppy resting at her feet. Jack stood by the door, silent, his hat in his hands. He didn't need words. The look between them said enough. In the days that followed, he visited often, bringing supplies, flowers, and the occasional story that made Sarah laugh through her exhaustion. When Sarah was finally discharged, she and Emily were placed under protection until the case closed. Jack returned to his quiet life, but not quite as alone as before. He volunteered part-time at the Veterans Care and Youth Support Center, where Emily was temporarily staying while Sarah recovered. The place was small, just a converted barn near the edge of town, but it was filled with laughter, old uniforms, and the smell of coffee. Emily took to the place quickly, her bright curiosity bringing warmth to the grizzled men who called it home. Rex, now healthy and growing fast, became the unofficial mascot, often seen chasing butterflies in the yard while the veterans cheered. Months passed and spring crept gently into Ashwood. One morning, sunlight spilled over the small backyard of Jack's cabin, painting everything gold. The air carried the scent of pine and wet earth. Emily stood near the fence, wearing a soft blue dress, her prosthetic leg gleaming under the light. Each step she took was careful but confident, as she practiced walking on the grass while Rex bounded around her, tail wagging, barking joyfully. "Easy, boy," she laughed, arms spread for balance. Sarah sat on the porch, a blanket over her knees, smiling quietly at the sight. Jack watched from the garden's edge, a mug of coffee warming his hands. He'd seen many mornings in his life, some filled with fire, some with silence, but none quite like this. There was no war here, no guilt, no storm, only peace. When Sarah noticed him watching, she called softly, "You know, she walks better every day because of you." Jack shook his head with a faint smile. "No, because she never gave up." He looked toward Emily, her laughter carried by the wind. For the first time in years, his chest didn't feel heavy. Later that day, a local journalist visited the center to cover the recovery of the MedCorps victims. A young woman with a notepad and recorder approached Jack while he fixed a fence post. "Mr. Carter," she said, smiling politely, "the community sees you as a hero for what you did. Do you think of yourself that way?" Jack paused, wiping the sweat from his brow. He thought of the night at the church, of Emily's trembling voice in the rain, of Sarah's whisper in the dark basement. He looked toward the garden, where Emily knelt beside Rex, tying a red ribbon around his collar. Then he met the reporter's eyes and said simply, "No, I just did what anyone should do. Never turn your back when someone needs help." The reporter lowered her pen, silent for a moment, then nodded. "That's a rare thing, Mr. Carter." Jack smiled faintly, eyes fixed on the horizon. "Maybe," he said softly, "but it shouldn't be." The sound of laughter drifted from the yard again, bright, unburdened, alive. Jack took a deep breath, the kind that filled the lungs and the soul, and looked up at the morning sky. For the first time in a long time, it was clear. In the quiet ending of this story, we are reminded that kindness doesn't need applause, and true heroism often walks in silence. Jack didn't act for glory, but because compassion asked him to. It's a simple truth. The world heals when ordinary people choose to care, even when no one is watching. If this story touched something in your heart, share your thoughts in the comments below. Tell us what kindness means to you and how you've seen silent heroes in your own life. Don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss the next story of faith, courage, and quiet sacrifice. May God bless you and everyone who still believes that goodness can change the world.